All right, hello and welcome. Today we're going to do part two of the monomyth. So we related Joseph Conrad's universal story monomyth. It seems to show up in a lot of mythology, a common theme. We related it to a movie called Zeitgeist. In Zeitgeist, they try to orient it, orient the stories, saying that Christianity tried to basically take over the stories. So it took over the pagan religions and took over ideas that were before them even. So basically plagiarizing other ideas in order to control and sort of dominate other ideas with their idea. And we what we're giving for a counter argument is that these consistencies are maybe telling us something really important about an overall story that we all have in our own minds, and not necessarily directly like the monomyth that Joseph Conrad talks about, but in religion, a sort of mono belief system. And we'll go through some more examples. So the one I have here, this is another one. We have 12 around the outside. And keep in mind, there is versions where it's not 12. But a lot of the versions have 12, and a lot of these names are consistent in some of the stories anyway. Of course, there's lots of versions of the story as well. But the central dragon character in the center, and then we have 12 around, and oriented in a circle, sort of like a clock. We have some examples in Greek history as well, so orienting all their gods in the pantheon. And it's interesting that the pantheon was 12 gods, and the Titans were 12 gods as well. Each sort of taking an aspect of the overall within their domain. And we have other examples as well. So this is Mithra. Mithra was a Persian god, we'll say, and then we can even see he's got a snake wrapped around him, and we have the feathers that he is wearing and a staff, but we can see some of these astrology characters around him. And this one we have it in a square sort of situated. Even Hercules, we have some examples, and this looks like a mosaic off a floor. But we can see him in the center and then all of his trials around him. So the important thing is a lot of these stories too. So there's supposed to be 10, but ended up being 12. In the Egyptian story, they gained extra days, and in this one, he was supposed to do 12 labors, and he had to do an extra 2. And I find that really interesting too, because that seems to be a common theme of sort of it was supposed to be something, and then because of extenuating circumstances, it had to be a little bit longer. And that is also a very common theme in mythology and religion. And it all comes back to this idea that we were talking about with Russell Targ. I'm trying to tie some of these ideas together. And Russell, as he said, that if you see yourself as just the person in the mirror, you're in for a lot of suffering. And you are non-local awareness independent of space and time. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this today, the space and time bit. Just one moment here, I'll get my pen. The space and time. So independent of space and time. So you are the central figure in this, is what I would assume that he's saying. You're not the individual you see, but rather the larger whole. And it's a perception thing to see yourself as an individual divorced of totality. But that's why we have all these stories that are the same. And this is why I showed, I think the next picture was this, is a hologram. It's because there's lots of different versions of the same film that create a three-dimensional world. And it's hard to wrap your mind around for sure. But this world is divorced by space and time, but it's perceived in a certain consistent pace of time. And that's how we take in this three-dimensional world. I don't remember what I was going to say there, but an example of this, and we get back to where we started with this whole idea, we get back to our circle and our square. And we're going to talk about Euler's topological invariances here. And don't be too concerned. It's not particularly complicated as far as this guy was a really good mathematician. But one of the things he found was with a circle, or sorry, three-dimensional sphere, If you take and you split it up in this sort of manner, and you take the vertices, you take minus the edges, and add the faces, you always end up with 2. And you can cut it up in any way you want, but no matter how you do it, you'll always end up in 2. And this other world we've talked about, this torus, which is actually a different shape, it's sort of, if you do that same process, take a square and cut it up in the same sort of methodology as we did here, if you cut it up in its own little grid, and take the vertices, minus the edges, and add the faces, you always get 0. So to me, this is a really interesting consistency, and it would make a lot of sense. So 2 being the 2 that we're going to talk about in a bit here, but what we're focused on right now is this one divorced as space and time. So I told you before, this is a feedback loop, not necessarily time. So we have a positive and we have a negative on this side, and it's sort of spun like you can look it up if you want, but like a Mobius band, but 2 spins. And it goes around, and then it's sort of, there's something in the past that affects the future. And in reality, we should be focusing on this part, but this will make a little more sense as I go forward here. Oh, I just wanted to show this too. So the fact that this square and the torus are the same thing can be seen if you take a donut. And this is off a video from Dong, and I'll link it in underneath the description so that you guys can take a look at it. It's really good. They do a very good job, but it shows this process of cutting it up and then eventually turning it into a perfect flat 2-dimensional square. And it's the same thing as the torus. So you'd have to imagine there's a little bit more going on in this torus than there is in this one that we see right here. But it gives you the basic idea that the donut shape is the same as the square. So I haven't talked much about Christianity, and this will be a really good time to do that, though, because this is something that usually people see divorced from science. But if you take in quantum physics, it does really incorporate very seamlessly with it. First, let's take a quote from A Course in Miracles. So this is one that some people think is a religious text, other people don't. But I find there's a lot of really interesting quotes from there. So when they were trying to teach people to do miracles, they would say, miracles undo the past. So they undo maybe a positive or a negative, it doesn't really matter. And undo the past in the present. So you let go of it in the spot that is never left. You let go of the positive or the negative, and you make it into one of these, and thus release the future. So you let go of this, so it's not represented here, or vice versa, whatever it is. So time is perceptual, but maybe you can notice in your own life how if you had something, a grievance in your past, you keep replicating it again in different forms in front of you. So it gets back to that same idea that we started with this sort of monomyth idea where everything materially changes, characters change, different entities as far as animals, people, doesn't matter what it is, but these same themes replicate themselves. It's because this is a feedback loop. And here's one from the Bible directly. So Jesus said unto them, verily, verily, this is one of my favorite quotes from the Bible, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. So saying, everybody's talking to him and saying about their ancestor Abraham and how great he was. And he said, before Abraham was, I am. So he always is, never changes. And here's another one from Hebrews. And keep in mind, I never really read the Bible growing up. I kind of happened upon it pursuing this logical stuff. And it just, a lot of it fits, I think. So a lot of people kind of just tune people out whenever they talk about, especially Christianity nowadays. But I feel like that may be harmful. And as Gandhi said, all religions are true. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday and today and forever. So never changes, always the same. But the manifested reality outside of the character that is perceiving is always changing. This is maybe the best way to describe this. So it is also very difficult to kind of make it make sense, but I'm going to try. So this is actually, to me, this is a creation story, this story. And I base it on Pythagoras' holy number of 10. But this is, to me, a good description of how everything started. And keep in mind, materially not, but mind-wise, yes. So the thing is with philosophy started off as good as it ever got, I think. Some of these huge giants of ancient Greek philosophy are some of the brightest minds, I believe, and so closest to the truth. People got distracted later on and chased their own tail, in a way of speaking. But these guys kind of saw the world a little differently. And the first one was Thales. His student was Anaximander. Anaximander's student was Anaximenes. And then Heraclitus, I can't even really know where he fit in. I believe he was from one of the islands in the Greek archipelago, and he was in there somewhere. But I'm going to say, so everybody would talk about, everybody had a different idea of what the arche was. And one of them said, one said it was fire. I think it was Heraclitus said it was fire. Water was Thales. Thales said it was water. Anaximander said it was a Pyrrhon. And Anaximenes said it was air. So keep in mind, this is the first thing ever. The first material of the world was supposedly one of these four things. And everybody's like, well, they obviously can't be all these things. And I'm going to show you through my explanation here that all of these can be true. But materially, it's very hard to understand because we see the world as happening as a seriation of events. So like I say, it's a feedback loop. It's not just this happens and this happens and this happens. So that doesn't make sense if all of these are true. But without further ado, I'll just start talking about it. Keep in mind the Bible and many other stories. This one's Hinduism, but we could give lots of examples from the Middle East. So the Amorites, Akkadians had always water was first. And usually a character, so this is in the Hindu tradition, and I think it was Vishnu sleeping in the coils of a snake in watery chaos, completely dark, and this is where their story starts. And even in the Christian Bible, we say, and earth was without form. So this is the beginning of Genesis, very beginning. Before anything is said to be created, this is what's there. So earth was without form and void, darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So waters are there before anything gets done. And I always found that interesting. In a lot of stories, that is the case. And of course, there's always other explanations for it. But what I'm going to try to do here today is give you an example how all of this stuff can be true given this one story. So I'll tell the story as a creation story first. So first there was the monad. So just one. The monad then makes two, completely equal, but sort of like a reflection of one another. And then this one creates many. So, but this process right here is not actually started with this first line here or this first line here. Most of the stories will start here, water. So they'll say their face, again, we see the face upon the deep, seeing their face upon the water. And I always found it interesting that Narcissus' story really sticks with people. And we're going to talk about this eventually too. But this idea of water being the first element, and I'll explain why that's relevant at a certain point here. But before that, there was only three things. So we have this fourth thing, and another kind of divergent ideas. This is how birth begins as well. Water is broken, water drops, then the baby comes. But this could be first. So okay, let's keep in mind, if you go down to, so we talk about quantum mechanics and physics. We talk about it on a very small scale. Most people are in agreement now that there's these tetrahedron all the way down to like Planck's length. So like the smallest constituents of the universe. So there's all these tetrahedron that fit together and really lump sum together. So I don't know how to exactly draw it. It doesn't really matter. If you want a more detailed description of this, there's lots of ways to get it. I'm just showing this for my own purposes here, so we'll just leave it at that. So they all fit together. Keep in mind, tetrahedron would explain 3 of these. Everything is starting off, though, with these tetrahedron would be fire. So fire is the element that's the highest, so of the heavens. So because fire rises, I suppose, but everybody had this as the highest element. And then air was the next one. And then water was what gave it another option to fire. So these two were diametrically opposed, water and fire. This is what created the cycle. And then when it was circulated back up, this would be earth, and it would be things that were made earth, when they're burnt, would be returned to nothingness again. So let's take Heraclitus' idea first. Heraclitus says fire is the first. Well, fire would make sense because fire is these basic tetrahedron before water existed. So these basic tetrahedron, which everything is made out of, the material of everything. And keep in mind, the tetrahedron fit into a bigger construct too, but this is the precondition of our material world is these tetrahedron. So Heraclitus could be right saying that it's fire, because that is what it is before it becomes something on Earth, pulled down by giving it a 4th option, which creates these squares. I know this is really hard to follow, but try if you can. Thales would also be correct. So Thales says the first material object is water. Well, yeah, because this gave another option other than fire. Everything was these tetrahedron fitting together until there was something to pull it downwards. And Anaximander could be correct too. Anaximander said it's going to be a pairon. So a pairon is even before this. So it's the state of everything which is the same. So this is actually true. This is probably the best answer, but it depends on what you're trying to say. So it is all fire, and it becomes fire when it has another option. But it is a pairon, which means like pre-state, before anything else is opposing one another. It is pre-state, and it's not fire until it has something to oppose it. So that's also kind of true. And then Anaximenes says that it's air. And that could be true too, because it's the first thing that is pulled down from the heavens, basically. And when it gets this 4th aspect of itself, it's pulled down and eventually becomes joined with the water. And water goes through all these processes, right? It becomes a gas, it becomes a liquid, and can be solid as well. I don't really know if that fits in that well, but we'll leave it with that. But anyway, most stories tell just this part. But there is this part of the story, usually what we just looked over it, because there's not much happening. But I can give examples, and I probably will eventually. But for now, just know that all of these are true. All these people saying that could be the first thing. And then this is actually a story of how what was created based on starting with monad, duad, mirror image, and then everything was created from this aspect as sort of a demiurge, as they call it. So somebody building outside of creation. So I'm too ambitious today, but this is sort of this thing. This is this demiurge world. Let's see what we got here. Oh, so yeah, these two opposites, and if we pull these together, we can see this very common theme with a lot of religions. The two triangles opposing one another, opposites, and you'll see this symbol all throughout the world, and especially related to religion. But really what we're talking about when we're talking about this aspect is what we were, well, the hero's journey. All religions are true, but that elephant that we're all trying to explain the same thing, but we can't really conceptualize it without giving an opposite. So we can explain this situation and we could say any one of these things is first, but it's all explaining the same story. Let's talk about Plato's Platonic solids. Plato put a lot of weight into geometry, and we can see our tetrahedron fire here. And by the way, I don't create any of this stuff, so these should give you a little bit of corroboration, the fact that all of these images are fitted together so well with what we're explaining here. And I've been looking at this stuff for a long time, so there's no coincidence there. But anyway, fire, air, earth, water. And water, by the way, is just more of this. And then this is supposed to be ether, or the holy air. So an example of from Christianity, so we're talking about quite a bit of Christianity today, was Metatron's cube. We're going to talk a lot about this coming up. We've talked about some of these nested shapes. This is all related to Metatron's cube and some of these bigger ideas. So we talked about the Venn diagram, basically. I mean, the Vesica Pisces in between. This usually has the Virgin Mary. And then we see pictures of Jesus. Fits together too. This is a really bad picture. It's not really accurate, but they'll have Jesus sitting on this side, so at the top to the bottom. And Metatron's cube is actually, this is at the core of it. Okay, so anyway, we can see some of these shapes in here too, right? So keep in mind, this is a sort of a simplified version to give you the most important aspects. But we can see some of our big ones that we've talked about. So the big triangle, the other big triangle, the two opposing forces. And these circular parts are supposed to represent the feminine aspects. The line portions are supposed to be the masculine aspects. But we have a lot of these shapes in here too. So we have our tetrahedra here. So you have at least one representation of it, and you can sort of visualize in your mind how it extends. You can see sort of our air elements. So you take these four together, so we get this sort of diamond shape like this one. The cubes are sort of in this three-dimensional cube shape. And you can sort of visualize these other ones as well. So we have lots of it, lots of these tetrahedra throughout here. But again, since they take away some of the accessory lines, that when there's a lot more, that'll make more sense of it in a while. But you can see that there's a possibility that all these shapes will fit in here and come out of this. This one's actually representing ether or holy air. So this is supposed to be like sort of the spaces in general, and not necessarily to one aspect of this, but we'll talk about this as well in the future. So a way we can represent this and show it and bring it back to this idea of the monomyth and how everything's sort of interconnected in these nested realities of being one aspect seen to another is Johannes Kepler. So Kepler was trying to reconstruct how the solar system worked, and the way he did it was by taking these Platonic solids and nesting them within each other. So you can see sort of the way it's mapped out here, a tetrahedron in between and a cubus at this point, and it gave a somewhat accurate, there's a little bit of disagreement now that they say that this isn't, well, obviously it's not perfectly accurate, but there's ways to talk our way out of that. Keep in mind, if we mentioned before, things are influenced by your beliefs and your what you anticipate. But at this time, this was the best way to describe it. And the reason why they said it was the best way to describe it, there was other ways of describing the way the solar system was oriented. But this one fit together, and this is why they took it. Is because they felt like everything should be beautiful and compact and fit together. And it worked out remarkably well. And we see some of these shapes that we've talked about before. So this is Kepler's, and here's Aristotle's. We can see sort of these shapes of the square within the square. And these are themes that we see quite often, and the two opposing forces and then the four total opposing forces. So Kepler was taken because it was harmonious, and he actually even had the sounds of the orbits of each of the planets and said it fit in with this harmonious idea of somewhere, like for example Mars being the representation of war, had sort of a high pitch and sort of tense sound to it, whereas Venus had this beautiful long sound to it, and he converted it into music that the orbits did. And Kepler was a very interesting guy. If we take some of these examples and we try to look for them examples in the real world, we can see this with snowflakes sometimes. So this GIF will give you an idea of some of these shapes, and if you make it three-dimensional, sort of how it fits, and it's sort of this diamond shape if you pull it to the side. A really good example, though, of how this fits into everything today was a really bright guy, I think, Garrett Lisey. He, with the same idea that Kepler had, that this should all be beautiful and harmonious, kind of went on his own path. And what he eventually found, and he's constructed this really intricate and beautiful design of how this all fits together. But this is just like we talked about before with Metatron's cube, and it being these sort of nested circles and then put into square shape. So each of these little dots is representing where these interconnect with each other. And you can see the shapes, and this is something that explains his system, will explain literally how everything functions in the universe. So how electrons function, how different elements react to other elements, how this all fits together. It's sort of this three-dimensional world which can be represented with these sort of triangle shapes and converted into sort of a circular shape if you take the holistic view of it. And we have these two opposing triangles in here. And to me, his system seems the most intricate and beautiful and seems to really, really work well. Time will tell, but right now this seems to be one of the best systems we have so far. And it fits in perfectly with what we talked about today. And you can see sort of this snowflake pattern that we have. And you can see his shirt he's wearing here. But anyway, he's became quite famous over the last few years because this is sort of a grand theory that encompasses everything. But going back to that same idea of what we were just talking about with Kepler, they liked it because it was the harmonious one. Now this one is harmonious as well, but are we looking for harmonious right now? And what you're looking for will preclude what you see. So people might find something that doesn't fit perfectly, potentially anyway, and maybe that could be explained by that too, because again, obviously I believe mind is above matter, but there's some constituents that only work together when they're fit in one conclusive piece. So at that same idea, there's obviously maybe some things that are immutable as well in this design. So just that's a lot today. I know that's I might have lost a few people in many parts of that, but there's no easy way about this. So all I'm trying to do is give you lots of really complicated stuff and trying to show it juxtapositioned, and if you can stay focused long enough to see how they fit together, then maybe you'll see that there might be something here. I hope that's what I ended up accomplishing today, but I'm not sure that's the case, but hopefully so. But anyway, we'll talk to you guys some day soon, and we will chat real soon, hopefully. Bye-bye.